We're so back. Institutional flow is now in full swing again. Bitcoin is almost at an all-time high. Not quite there yet, but it's close. BlackRock has reached a massive milestone with a new record, something that's never happened before. BlackRock is now comparable to the largest ETFs in the world. Even Ray Dalio, the hedge fund legend, is now talking about Bitcoin as potential money in a new interview. He says Bitcoin will see an inflow of 15 trillion here, and Bitcoin OG. Max Kaiser has now officially met with the Trump administration to convince them to buy Bitcoin. They should start buying Bitcoin in the US immediately. Is the big move coming now? Before we dive in, take a quick second. I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like button below for me. This is completely free content, but you'd be doing both the Bitcoin price and me a huge favor by supporting this channel. It's really important that we build some traction here now. As a thank you, let me show you this lamp. And it looks like we've now settled here around the US dollar. One reason we're seeing such a strong rally again is that BlackRock is fully back in the game. For example, they've just bought nearly 4,000 Bitcoin. And now it's even being said that BlackRock is seeing the largest inflows here in the past 3 months. So that's really intense. But you have to be careful here. The news is actually a bit misleading. It says TRI, the largest inflows in 3 months. But that was actually the volume, which was just really big. So, TRI had the largest volume in 3 months. That's how it should be put. And volume here doesn't necessarily mean positive net inflows, POS. Volume means sales plus purchases. And in the end, about 4,000 Bitcoin were bought here. But you can see, there are still sellers. And my guess is that the Bitcoin price will mainly go up because these sellers will disappear in the near future. So, we have buyers on one side and sellers on the other. When the selling pressure disappears, we're left with only buyers. And that's what's going to pump the Bitcoin price. Then we also have ETF split analyst Eric B. Here, Kunaz goes into detail here. GLD and IBIT are in the top 10 ETFs by volume today, which is rare, because I guess everyone wants to get in on the debit trade. So, gold and Bitcoin are in high demand right now. GLD is, of course, the gold ETF, and the Bitcoin ETF. We can see here that IBIT is even in 7th place. What he means by the basic trades happening now is that money is simply being devalued. And people are fleeing into Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the flight to quality here. You can see it again in another post from Eric Billins. IBIT is now in the top 20 ETF assets, with assets back over 90 billion US dollars. It has just overtaken the legendary XLK. So, we see it here at the very top, of course. Woo, there's still a bit of a gap. Almost, not quite, a 10-fold increase needed, but still a bit of a gap. But we see that if the Bitcoin ETF doubles again, we'll move up to 8th place, already in the top 10. So, the top 10 are within reach. In my opinion, doubling the volume or size here is definitely possible. That's why hedge fund legend Ray Dalio is also very positive about Bitcoin. Though, to be fair, he's also a bit skeptical. But Ray Dalio here is talking about the legitimacy of Bitcoin.
Is Bitcoin a legitimate currency to hold in that environment?
That's an interesting and not easily answered question.
Doch, das ist ganz einfach zu beantworten, ja.
There's a medium of exchange and a storehold of wealth, and most importantly, this storehold of wealth. So Bitcoin is perceived by many as a money. It is limited in its supply. And it has certain transaction benefits. Very easily, all around the world, you can transact in it, and so it has those elements. I doubt that any central bank will take it on as a reserve currency because everybody can understand and watch, governments can, who is doing what transactions on it, governments can. So there's no privacy to it. And there is a question of whether the code can be broken or things can be done to make it, let's say, less effective, including, government controls of it. So I can't say exactly how effective it is as a money, but it's being perceived by many as an alternative money. My own approach is in my share of my portfolio, I have gold and I have some Bitcoin, but not.
Of course, the mistake would be to just buy more Bitcoin. But no, everyone can decide that for themselves. Interesting analysis. He says he's not sure whether Bitcoin will actually work as a reserve currency for central banks to hold. I mean, in my opinion, you'd be foolish not to do it. Sooner or later, it will definitely come to the point where central banks will also hold Bitcoin. What's also interesting is that there have been new posts from Naval, because Naval was one of the first, if not the very first, who said back in 2013 or 2014, I can't remember exactly, around that time, that the first country to use printed money to buy Bitcoin will be the winner. And now Naval is writing that Bitcoin is an insurance against inflation. But Radiolo also points out here that Bitcoin is not anonymous by default, and that's basically his main criticism. Why central banks don't want to buy it? Because, let's say, they want money that can't be tracked. And in that sense, gold in offline form would be preferable, you have to admit. Naval goes even further and says that cash is insurance against Bitcoin. Here, he's also addressing the issue of anonymity, because cash offers a certain level of privacy that Bitcoin does not. And there were a lot of discussions in the comments below, as you can see here, because Naval went even further and said that even Satoshi himself can't use Bitcoin, precisely because of the transparency we have with Bitcoin. Just like Ray Dalio says, if Satoshi were to move Bitcoin now, it would trigger panic. That's why Naval says here that Satoshi can't use Bitcoin, but that's not really true. If we look further down here, as I just mentioned, there was a good comment. For example, Satoshi is using Bitcoin by holding Bitcoin. So, that's also a big misunderstanding, to think that you only use Bitcoin when you make a transaction. But that's not true. You use Bitcoin all the time, even just by holding it. For example, when people say Bitcoin has no use case, that you can't use it for anything, but you can hold it, that's already enough of a use case. That's actually the killer use case, being able to preserve your purchasing power without it getting destroyed here. So I can't fully agree with Wall here when he says Satoshi can't use Bitcoin. Yeah, of course Satoshi can use Bitcoin, but that's the cool thing. He basically removed himself from the Bitcoin network, selflessly. If he's alive, then he probably isn't interested in making money here. Or maybe he has even more than just the 1 million Bitcoin. Maybe he mined more after that. I don't know. What is true here is what I posted here. Yesterday, he really went on a rant here about various stories related to Bitcoin. Stablecoins are basically just CBDCs with extra steps, and I totally agree with that. But with the Satoshi story, I'm not so sure if he's actually on the right track. Then we had a crazy meeting here. I don't know exactly where it was, whether it was at the White House or somewhere else. No idea. But here, Teen Trump was informed about the global impact of Bitcoin country El Salvador. And this comes from Max Geyser, who posted it here. That means he has now met with the Trump team. I made this point very clear, much to everyone's annoyance. The US needs to stop hesitating and start buying Bitcoin. Otherwise, they'll lose the global hash war. We're coming back at the end of October for follow-up events and a Max and Stacy's show at the new DC Pub Key. So they're coming back again to Orange Pill the US. That's actually an interesting point, because there's also Jason Lowery with his book Software, who actually has connections within the US government, and is probably also doing some consulting for the US government, and who was even RFK's personal advisor, or maybe still is, I'm not sure. In any case, that's definitely relevant. It's also not enough to just buy Bitcoin. You also have to build up hash rate. That's going to be very, very important in the future. And if you don't do that, you can't really claim to be the Bitcoin or crypto superpower of the world. Frankly, what the US is doing here is all bullshit. You can only be the Bitcoin and crypto superpower of the world if you accumulate enough Bitcoin, if you also build up hash rate, and everything else is just bullshit from people. At least, that's my opinion. Feel free to write in the comments how you see it. James Lovis also describes the current situation very accurately here. Good day. I've said it before and I'll say it again. When institutions start buying Bitcoin, they won't be as price sensitive as you and I. So, they're just not as concerned about the price. They'll simply look at their portfolio, set an allocation, then give the order to the broker and say, go ahead with this volume for as much as it takes. $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, or whatever it takes to reach their position. Because of this dynamic, price discovery for Bitcoin itself really begins when several institutions enter the conversation. Just as demand seeks volume, volume in turn seeks price, no matter how high that may be. I wish you all a good day. And this is really very accurate, because we tend to look at entry prices and such. But for big institutional players, it doesn't really matter whether the price is at $1 million or whatever. If they decide, okay, we need to go big on Bitcoin now, then they simply say, okay, we want to buy a 3% Bitcoin allocation. And they keep buying until they reach that 3%. Of course, at some point, they might do some rebalancing as well. It can also happen that they simply sell again without looking at the price. Because, for example, certain assets aren't allowed to make up more than 5% of the portfolio, or something like that, and Bitcoin will just outperform the other assets. So once it reaches a certain level, they have to sell Bitcoin again. That's also something many people don't understand. But it's really interesting how these institutional players operate in a completely different way. A private investor looks at the price, buys, holds forever, while the institutional investor doesn't look at the price, but sells again. If Bitcoin performs too well, which will happen sooner or later. And that's exactly what Michael Saylor is posting here. Our journey began with $25 million in Bitcoin and an immediate, unrealized loss of $4 million. Today, we've closed at a new all-time high, $77.4 billion in Bitcoin net asset value. So, it's wild. Saylor didn't necessarily start under the best conditions, but immediately took a hit, really got smacked right from the start. Still, he persevered, because he simply knew that Bitcoin would prevail. He believed in Bitcoin, he believed in himself, and now he's on his way to making this one of the most valuable companies in the world. And that's exactly what our PH Hayes here assumes as well.
At the end of that, talking about, this long-term 2028 price tag of Bitcoin around 3.2 million, you say very clearly at the end of that, post that, hey guys, I'm not saying that that's what Bitcoin's going to hit, but is that what Bitcoin can hit by 2028?
So, by 2028, 3.2 million. He's not saying it will definitely happen, but that's roughly the direction we're heading in.
Infinity, right?
So it could even reach infinity, obviously, because if fiat hyperinflates, then Bitcoin will be at infinity.
I don't know. But I just wanted to mentally check, okay, well, if this much money could be printed and, there's one way it could happen, is the magnitude there so that you're directionally right? And you can be, you can fuck around with a lot of stuff. You bought something at 100,000 and it goes to 2 million, 2 million, 3 million, whatever the price is, you're allowed to make a lot of mistakes. But if you're, in something that doesn't have the potential to have that sort of magnitude of upside, then obviously it's much more difficult to earn a positive return.
Look, you highlighted $15 trillion in a credit explosion, de-dollarization push, all of this. Does it only go into Bitcoin? Is the entire crypto market, the big cap tokens, the big winners as, monetary expansion continues?
Of course, the majority of it will go into Bitcoin. And
also, he's saying here that a large part of the printed money will flow into Bitcoin. We potentially have up to 15 trillion that could flow into Bitcoin. But not all of that will flow into Bitcoin. I can tell you that right now. And we often see that it's not large portions going into Bitcoin, but just a part of it. Such a small asset class might only get a small share, but that's already enough to make a significant impact on Bitcoin. 3.8 million is probably way exaggerated, but hey, even if we do not reach 3.8 million by 2028, if it is just 1 million, I would not say no to that either. Although, to be honest, I do not really believe we will be at 1 million in 2028. The possibility is there, but whether it actually happens is a whole different story. But of course, hey, our PH Hayes is bullish. If you're bullish on Bitcoin too, then I'd recommend the 22 Bitcoin app to you. It's really super easy to use. You can buy here, you can sell here. I've set it to HODL mode now, so the sell button is gone. You can send money to the app here, deposit money in seconds. As you can see, available 24/7. Low fees here. You have instant buy, savings plan, limit, price, order. Basically everything you need here. And the really special thing here with Einzig Bitcoin is that you can have every purchase sent directly to your own wallet, which I always recommend. It's best to connect it right away with a hardware wallet like a TREZOR, not to sell, but to store. I'll also put a link below for a TREZOR hardware wallet, and there's a discount with the code BitcoinHotel. That's what's really awesome about Bitcoin here. You get all these features. That's why it's recommended for beginners, but of course also for more advanced users. And the best part is, with the code BitcoinHotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. So feel free to check it out. And guys, I'll see you around. Peace out.